Hey, before we get started, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I want to know if we got folks in Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, Detroit, London, Lagos, wherever you are. Speak up. This story travels, and I want to know where it lands. Put your city, your country. Let's see how far this reaches. Now, let's go. A story by Lоретте Мэй Джонson, as told to nobody, because I don't need a witness. The Lord already knows. I want you to understand something before I start talking. I am not a bitter woman. Never have been. My mama raised me in a house on Piedmont Avenue where bitterness wasn't allowed past the front door. Same as mud on your shoes. She said bitterness was a thing that rotted you from the inside, like a sweet potato left too long in the ground. You don't even smell it going bad. You just reach for it one day and your hand goes right through. So no, I am not bitter. But I do believe in justice. And I believe in patience. And I believe that God, in His infinite wisdom and His particular sense of humor, has a way of setting things right that no human being could ever plan better if they tried for 100 years. My name is Lоретте Мэй Джонсон. I was born Loretta May, Washington in 1959 in a house on the east side of Atlanta that my grandfather built with his own 2 hands after the war. I grew up eating my grandmother's biscuits and listening to gospel on a little radio in the kitchen. And I knew from the time I was about 9 years old that I was going to be a teacher. Not because anybody told me to be, because I liked the way understanding looked on a child's face. That moment when something clicks. That light? Nothing in the world like it. I taught 5th grade at Dobbs Elementary for 33 years. 33 years of other people's children. And I loved every single one of them. Even the ones who gave me gray hair. Especially those ones, actually. I married Gerald Lamont Johnson on a Saturday in June of 1983. I was 24 years old, and I thought I was the luckiest woman alive.
Gerald was handsome. I want to be honest about that, because some women, when they get to the end of a story like mine, they pretend they never saw anything good in the man. That's not fair, and it's not true. Gerald Johnson, at 31 years old, was 6 feet and 2 inches of good-looking man, with a smile that could stop traffic on Peachtree Street, and hands that knew how to hold a woman like she was worth holding. He was working in property management then, just starting out, ambitious as anything, and he had a way of talking about the future that made you believe he could see it, like he had a window to something nobody else could look through. I made my own wedding dress, white cotton eyelet with a square neckline and buttons down the back, 42 of them. And my Aunt Rosalind sewed the veil by hand. We got married at Greater Harvest Baptist Church, the same church my parents got married in, the same church where I was baptized at 11 years old in a white dress and came up out of the water coughing and sputtering while the whole congregation laughed. Pastor Elias officiated. There were 300 people there. My mother cried through the whole ceremony. We moved into a house in Decatur that first year. A small house, but a good one. 2 bedrooms, a yard, a kitchen with yellow walls that I painted myself on a Saturday afternoon while Gerald was out watching football at his brother Wendell's house. I remember standing in that kitchen with yellow paint on my arms, looking at what I'd done, feeling like the world was exactly the right size.
We had 3 children. Marcus first, then Denise, then little Raymond, who came late and surprised us both, and turned out to be the funniest person I have ever known in my life. We raised them in that house, and then in a bigger house when Gerald's business started doing well, and I taught school and cooked dinner and helped with homework and drove to baseball practice and dance recitals and sat in the back of auditoriums watching my children become themselves. And I genuinely thought that Gerald was doing the same thing. that we were doing it together. That's the thing nobody tells you about a long marriage. How much of it is assumption. You stop looking directly at each other somewhere around year 15, year 16, and you start just assuming. Assuming he's grateful, assuming he sees you, assuming that the life you built together looks the same from his side as it does from yours. I assumed for a long time.
My best friend in this world is Claudette Aretha Simmons, and she has been my best friend since 1971, when we were both 12 years old and she defended me from Brenda Patterson on the playground at Woodson Middle School. Brenda said something ugly about my shoes. They were my cousin's old shoes, hand-me-downs, a little worn at the toe. And Claudette turned around and said, "Brenda, the only thing uglier than your personality is your ponytail. Leave her alone." Brenda Patterson never bothered me again. Claudette and I have been inseparable ever since. Claudette never married. She says she saw everything she needed to see watching other people's marriages, and she made her peace with that early on. She has a condo in Buckhead, a little dog named Reverend, 2 closets full of beautiful clothes, and she travels to Paris every other year and brings me back something extravagant that I never wear anywhere but love deeply. She is sharp as a tack and twice as pointed, and she has been telling me things about Gerald for longer than I want to admit.
The first time she said something, it was about 6 years ago. We were having lunch at South City Kitchen, sitting outside, and she said, very carefully, the way Claudette says things she's been rehearsing, "Loretta, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you react." I put down my fork. She said, "I saw Gerald last Tuesday at the Marriott on Cortlandt. He was with a woman." I sat with that for a moment. What kind of with? The kind where his hand is on the small of her back and they're walking to the elevator. I looked at my plate. Then I picked up my fork and I said, "What did she look like?" Claudette said, "Younger, maybe 40. Nice coat, natural hair." I nodded slowly. I eat a bite of catfish. I said, "Thank you for telling me." Claudette waited. I said, "I'm going to need some time to think about this." And she said, "Take all the time you need, baby. I'm not going anywhere."
Here is what I did with that information. I went home that night and I sat in my kitchen. Different kitchen now, bigger house and stone mountain, granite counters, sub-zero refrigerator that Gerald picked out and I never asked for. And I sat there for 2 hours while Gerald was in the den watching ESPN, and I thought about 41 years. I thought about the yellow kitchen indicator. I thought about Marcus's first day of school, how Gerald held his hand in the parking lot, and Marcus tried to shake it off because he was big now, Daddy. And Gerald laughed and let him go, and then watched him walk through those doors with an expression on his face that was the purest love I have ever seen on another human being. I thought about that man. And then I thought about the man who had been coming home late for 2 years, who went to real estate conferences that I never got invited to, who had started keeping his phone face down on every surface in the house. Those were 2 different men. Or maybe they were the same man, and I had just been loving one half of them, while the other half was somewhere else entirely. I didn't say anything to Gerald that night. I didn't say anything for a while, but I started paying attention.
I want to be clear. I did not hire a private investigator. I am a retired school teacher. I know how to do research. I had been handling the household finances for most of our marriage because Gerald, for all his business sense, could not be trusted with a checkbook. Aid freely admitted this. "Loretta, you handle the money, I'll handle the deals." That was our arrangement. so I had access to everything. Or I thought I did. What I found when I started actually looking, not just paying bills and balancing the account, but looking, was a second account. A business account that I knew about in theory, attached to his property management company, LJ Properties LLC. What I hadn't looked at closely, because I trusted him, because it was his business, because I am a fool who taught other people's children to read and apparently forgot to read the fine print of her own life. What I hadn't looked at was where the money in that account was going. $47,000 over 3 years. I sat with that number for a long time. $47,000 to a woman named Tamika Renee Bridges, in payments labeled consulting fees and administrative services, and one memorably labeled marketing support. I wondered what exactly was being marketed and to whom.
I found the apartment lease, a nice place in Midtown, signed by Gerald Lamont Johnson and Tamika Renee Bridges, co-signers, as of 14 months ago. 14 months! I also found the draft of the divorce filing. Gerald had apparently consulted an attorney, a man named Patterson. I didn't know him. And there was an email thread forwarded to Gerald's personal account discussing the best strategy for protecting his assets in a divorce. His assets. The assets that included a second property in Alpharetta that I had used $80,000 from the sale of my mother's house in Decatur. My mother's house. The house she left to me to help him purchase 3 years ago. My mother passed in 2018. Breast cancer. Very quick at the end, which the doctor said was merciful. She left me that house on Piedmont Avenue and a box of her good jewelry and a savings account with $14,000 in it. I put the jewelry in a safety deposit box at Regions Bank, and I put the savings in our joint account, and I sold the house, and I gave Gerald the money because he said it was a good investment, because he said we were building something together, because I believed him. 41 years of believing him.
I sat in my kitchen at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, 5 months before the Greater Harvest Annual Church Banquet, and I read through every document I had found, and I did not cry. I want you to understand that. I did not cry. I had already cried privately, here and there, about other things. The distance, the coldness, the way he looked through me at dinner like I was part of the furniture. But this night, with the evidence of everything laid out in front of me on my kitchen table, I did not cry. I thought about my mother. She used to say, when a man shows you who he is, believe him. But when he shows you who he is, you also get to decide what to do about it. The believing isn't the end of the story. The deciding is. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea. I sat back down, and I started making a list. I called Claudette at 7 a.m. She answered on the second ring, because she is always awake early, coffee in hand, watching the news with Reverend in her lap. I said, I need you to help me. She said, I've been waiting 5 years for you to say those exact words. What do you need? I told her everything. She didn't gasp, and she didn't say I told you so, because Claudette is many things, but she is not cruel. She just listened. And when I was done, she said, okay, here's what we're going to do. The first thing was an attorney. Not some divorce lawyer who didn't know me. I needed somebody who understood what was at stake, who would look at those documents and see clearly what had been done and what could be undone. Claudette's niece DeShonda had gotten a divorce 3 years ago, and she'd used a lawyer named Darius Webb, who had an office downtown on Auburn Avenue, and who, according to DeShonda, was young and brilliant and meticulous, and
absolutely terrifying in a conference room. I called Darius Webb on a Wednesday morning. His assistant put me through, and he listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. Then he said, "Mrs. Johnson, I want you to bring me everything. Every document, every bank statement, every email. Can you do that?" I said, "Young man, I am a retired teacher. Organization is all I know how to do."
He laughed. He had a good laugh. Then let's get to work. Over the next 4 months, Darius built a case. The $80,000 from my mother's estate was documentable. The sale proceeds, the transfer to the joint account, the subsequent movement to Gerald's business account, the purchase of the Alpharetta property. Darius said that amount was clearly traceable as my separate property and would need to be returned to me or accounted for in the settlement. He also addressed the consulting payments to Tamika Bridges, which he described in a very professional, calm voice as potentially fraudulent business expenses that misrepresented the nature of the relationship between the parties. I appreciated the language. Professional, clean, like a scalpel. I filed for divorce on a Friday, quietly. No drama. Gerald didn't know it was coming because I had made a decision early on that I was not going to have a conversation with him about any of this until the papers were already signed and filed. He had been planning his exit for over a year without saying a single word to me. I was allowed to plan mine without commentary. I also made sure I was there when he found out. I just wasn't planning to tell him in the kitchen.
Let me tell you about Greater Harvest Baptist Church, because you need to understand what this place means to understand what happened there. Greater Harvest is not just a church. It is a community, a history, a gathering of people whose families have been sitting in those pews for generations. My grandmother was a member. My parents were married there. I was baptized there. My children were baptized there. It is the kind of place where people know your middle name and your grandmother's pie recipe and exactly how much weight you've gained since Easter. It is a place of warmth and love, and, if I'm being honest, a healthy amount of everybody knowing everybody's business. The annual banquet is held every September. It's a fundraiser and a celebration. The church rents out the Biltmore Ballroom in Midtown. There's a catered dinner, there's music, there's a program, there's an award ceremony where the church recognizes members who have given time and money and service to the community throughout the year. This year, Gerald was being honored. Gerald had given a substantial donation to the church's building fund, $40,000. Money that I later confirmed, once Darius ran the numbers, had come partially from, you guessed it, LJ Properties LLC. He was being honored as a pillar of the community, a faithful servant, a generous man.
I want to pause and acknowledge the particular audacity of that. I found out about the award in July when Sister Patricia, who coordinates the banquet committee and who sends approximately 40 emails a week about church matters, sent an email to the Greater Harvest Women's Ministry list, which I am on, asking if anyone would like to offer a tribute to our dear brother Gerald at the banquet. I read that email twice. Then I replied, "Sister Patricia, I would love to say a few words." She wrote back, "How wonderful! We will put you on the program, Sister Loretta." I closed my laptop and sat very still for a moment. Then I called Claudette. She said, "Uh-huh." I said, "You already knew I was going to do this." She said, "Baby, I knew you were going to do something. I didn't know it was going to be this spectacular. What are you going to wear?" Now, this is important. What you wear to a thing like this matters. Not because of vanity, though I am not without vanity. I am 65 years old and I have earned the right to care about how I look. But because the way you carry yourself tells a story before you open your mouth. I thought about this carefully.
I chose a burgundy dress. Deep, rich, dark red, like wine, like garnets. Long sleeves, fitted through the waist, a hem that hit just below the knee. I bought it at a boutique on Ponce de Leon that my daughter Denise had been trying to get me into for 2 years. I bought new shoes to match, and pearls, my grandmother's pearls, the real ones, the ones she wore to every important occasion of her adult life. I had my hair done on Saturday morning. My stylist Deandra, who has been doing my hair for 15 years and who I trust absolutely, gave me exactly what I asked for. Sleek, elegant, not a hair out of place. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left the house that evening, and I thought, Loretta Mae Washington, your grandmother would be proud of you. The Biltmore Ballroom is a beautiful room. High ceilings, chandeliers, round tables with white linens, candles. The church always does it right for this event. There were easily 300 people there that night, maybe more. Families, elders, young people, the whole congregation and their guests. Gerald had told me about the banquet in passing. I'll be getting an award, you should come. With the casual arrogance of a man who assumes he will always have a wife to put on his arm. He didn't know I had already been in contact with Sister Patricia. He didn't know a lot of things.
He also, I should mention, brought Tamika Bridges to the banquet. Not to my table. He wasn't quite that bold. But she was there, at a table near the back with some people I didn't recognize. Friends of hers, I assumed. She was wearing a green dress, and she looked uncomfortable, which I understood, because she was sitting in a room full of people who knew Gerald's wife, and she was clearly trying to be invisible. I noticed her the moment I walked in. I noticed her, and I noted her location, and I looked away, and I went to find Claudette. Claudette was at our table in a royal blue wrap dress and her good earrings, sitting next to my daughter Denise and Denise's husband Kevin, and my son Marcus was there with his wife Chandra, and little Raymond, who is 32, and I will never stop calling him little, was there by himself because his girlfriend had to work, and he leaned over and kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Mama, you look dangerous." I patted his face.
Darius Webb was standing near the entrance in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my refrigerator. He nodded at me when I came in. He had 2 copies of the filed divorce papers in a leather portfolio under his arm. We had discussed exactly what his role was tonight. He was not here to make a scene. He was here to be a fact. Gerald came in about 20 minutes later. He was wearing his good blue suit, the one I'd given him for his 65th birthday, and he had that easy smile on his face, that glad-handing walk, stopping to embrace the pastor, clapping the deacons on the back. He was at home in this room. He had always been good with people. That was always true about him. He stopped when he saw me. Just for a second. I held his eyes. Then he came over and said, "Loretta, you look nice." I said, "Thank you, Gerald." I smiled. "Congratulations on your award." Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. Just a hair of it. Then the smile came back, and he moved on to greet somebody else. Denise put her hand on my arm under the table. I said, quietly, "I'm fine, baby." She said, "I know you are." Dinner was served. The food was good. The church had used the same catering company for years, and they knew what they were doing. We ate and we talked, and I watched my children around that table, and I thought about every dinner we'd ever had together, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday night when the whole family somehow ended up at my house eating leftover chicken and playing cards too loud.
I thought, whatever happens to this marriage, none of that goes away. That is mine. That belongs to me. Around 9 o'clock, the program began. The master of ceremonies was Brother Nathaniel, a deacon who had been doing this for years, and who had a voice like warm honey. He welcomed everyone, he gave the history of the fundraiser, he thanked the committee. Then he moved into the awards portion of the evening. There were 3 awards before Gerald's. A young woman from the youth ministry who had organized a summer tutoring program, a couple who had been married 50 years and were being honored for their example and service, an older deacon who was retiring after 40 years of faithful work. Then Brother Nathaniel said, "And now, for our final and most distinguished honor of the evening, we recognize a man who has been a pillar of this congregation for over 2 decades, a businessman, a community leader, a faithful member of our church board, Brother Gerald Lamont Johnson." The room applauded. Gerald stood. He walked to the stage. With that walk, Brother Nathaniel said, "Before Brother Gerald says a few words, we understand that his wife, Sister Loretta, has requested to offer a brief tribute."
Gerald, I noticed, did not look pleased about this. He glanced in my direction. I was already standing. I walked to the microphone. I took my time. I am 65 years old. I have stood in front of classrooms for 33 years. I know how to hold a room. I said, "Good evening. For those of you who don't know me well, I am Loretta Mэй Johnson, 41 years." People smiled and nodded. Someone near the back said, "That's right." I said, "I want to say something tonight about the man I have known for 41 years, because I think it's important that the people who love him and respect him and are honoring him tonight, I think you deserve to know him the way I know him." The room was very quiet. I said, "Gerald Johnson is a man who knows how to make people feel seen. He has a gift for that. He walks into a room and he makes every person in it feel like they matter. That is a real gift. It is not nothing." I paused. "What he is less good at," I said, "is making his wife feel seen. But I suspect some of you already knew that." A few people shifted in their seats. Pastor Elias at the head table had gone very still. I said, "I have spent 41 years in that man's house, raising his children, managing his home, supporting his business, loving him the best I knew how. And I want to be clear, I don't regret my children. I don't regret my home. I don't regret the life I built. What I do regret is the 3 years I spent not knowing what was being built behind my back." Gerald said, from somewhere off to my right, "Loretta." I said, still at the microphone, still calm, "Gerald, I will be done in a moment." The room went absolutely silent. I reached into my handbag. I had a small evening bag, just big enough for what I needed, and I removed a folded document. I unfolded it slowly. I said, "On the 9th of this month, I filed for divorce from Gerald Lamont Johnson in Fulton County, citing irreconcilable differences. The paperwork has been properly filed and served. My attorney, Mr. Darius Webb, is present in this room tonight." I didn't point at Darius. I didn't need to. The filing includes a detailed accounting of approximately $47,000 transferred from LJ Properties LLC over a period of 3 years to an individual named Tamika Bridges, listed as consulting fees, and also includes a claim for the return of $80,000 from the estate of my late mother, Dorothy Washington, which was contributed to the purchase of a property in Alpharetta, and which I am entitled to recover. I folded the paper back up. I put it in my bag. I said, "I am not here to embarrass anyone. I am not here to cause pain. I am here because this church, this community, these people, they are my family.
They have been my family since I was a little girl. And I believe in telling the truth in front of the people who love you, because that is the only truth that counts. I looked at the room. 300 faces looking back at me.
I said, Gerald, I wish you well. I genuinely do. 41 years is not nothing, and I will not pretend it was. But the woman you have been treating like furniture for the last several years is checking out. And I want the people in this room to know that I am not leaving broken. I am leaving on my own 2 feet, in my mother's pearls, and I am going to be just fine. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. It was broken by First Lady Vivian Elias, who stood up from the head table and began to applaud. She was wearing yellow, and she looked like sunlight, and I loved her for it. The applause spread. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to fill that room with something that felt like recognition, like truth, landing where it was supposed to land. I stepped back from the microphone. I looked at Gerald once. He was standing very still. He looked like a man who had just realized he had been standing on a floor that was never as solid as he thought.
I nodded at him, not cruelly, just acknowledgement. 41 years of acknowledgement. Then I turned around. Claudette was waiting for me before I even got back to the table. She took my arm, smooth as water, and we walked together toward the doors. I could hear the room behind us, the murmur rising, people turning to each other. And I knew there would be 100 phone calls made before midnight, 100 conversations I would not be present for and did not need to be. Denise met us at the door. Her eyes were bright and her jaw was tight, and she hugged me so hard I felt it in my spine. She said, "Mama." I said, "I'm okay." She said, "I know. That's not why I'm hugging you." Raymond was right behind her. He put both hands on my face the way he used to do when he was small, looking at me with those eyes so like his father's, when his father was still a person I recognized. And he said, "Mama, that was the most Georgia thing I have ever seen in my life, and I have never been so proud."
I laughed. Lord, I laughed. Right there in the lobby of the Biltmore Ballroom at 65 years old, with my mother's pearls around my neck and the divorce papers filed, and 41 years behind me. I laughed until my eyes watered. Darius met us in the lobby. He shook my hand. He said, "Mrs. Johnson, I want you to know, nothing that happened tonight affects the legal proceedings in any way. Everything is filed. Everything is in order. What happens next is entirely up to the process." He paused. But personally, that was something. I said, "Thank you, Darius." Outside, Denise's car was waiting. The night air was cool for September. That particular Atlanta almost fall, where it finally breaks after months of heat and you feel like you can breathe again. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. Claudette stood beside me. She said, "You hungry?" I said, "Starving. I didn't eat hardly anything at dinner." She said, "There's a Waffle House on Northside Drive." I said, "Let's go." We went to Waffle House. All of us. Claudette and me and Denise and Kevin and Marcus and Chandra and Raymond squeezed into those booths and at the counter, ordering waffles and scattered hash browns and coffee at 10:30 on a Saturday night. And we talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, the way families do when something big has just happened and you need the ordinary to come back in around the edges of it. Raymond said at some point, "So what's next? What do you actually want, Mama?" I thought about that. "I want to go to Savannah," I said. "I've been saying I want to see Savannah for 15 years, and Gerald never wanted to go."
Then we go to Savannah, Denise said. I want to sleep in the middle of the bed, I said. I have been sleeping on one side of a king-size bed for 41 years. I would like to sleep in the middle. Done, said Claudette.
I want to plant a garden, I said. A real one. Tomatoes, collards, maybe some flowers. I never had time before. I have time now. Marcus said quietly, "You okay, Mama? For real?" I looked at my son. He looks so much like me that sometimes it startles me. He has my eyes, my mother's eyes, and he was looking at me with a care in his face that was worth more than everything in any bank account in any city. I said, "Baby, I have been preparing for tonight for 5 months. I have a good lawyer and a best friend and 3 children who showed up and sat at my table. I have my mother's pearls. I have 41 years of hard living, and I came through it without losing myself." I reached across and put my hand on his. I am okay. I am more than okay. I am free. I moved out of the Stone Mountain house on a Tuesday. Darius had arranged for me to take what was mine. My furniture, my mother's things, my grandmother's china, the photographs of my children, and I packed it all neatly, labeled every box, and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur. Not far from where my mother's house used to stand. Not far from where I started. The apartment has good light, east-facing windows in the kitchen that catch the morning sun, and I drink my coffee there every day, and I watch the light come in, and I think about my grandmother, who said once that a woman's life doesn't really start until she stops living it for somebody else. I was 65 when she said that. To me, in my kitchen, before all of this. I thought she was being dramatic.
Gerald's award at the banquet, to my knowledge, was not officially presented. The program moved on, as programs do, and I understand the conversation that followed among the church leadership was significant. I wasn't there for it, and I didn't ask. Pastor Elias called me the following Monday and said simply that the church stood with me and that they would be praying for all parties. I thanked him, and I meant it. The divorce was settled 7 months after I filed. Darius was everything DeShonda said he was. The Alpharetta property was sold, and my $80,000 returned. The contested business assets were divided fairly. I will not be comfortable for the rest of my life, but I will be fine, which is all I ever asked of this world. Tamika Bridges, from what I understand, moved out of that Midtown apartment 6 weeks after the banquet. I don't know what happened between her and Gerald. I don't need to know. That is their story, not mine.
My story is this. I am 65 years old. I wake up in the middle of my bed. I drink coffee in the morning light. I am growing tomatoes in pots on my balcony, and they are doing better than I expected. I talk to Claudette every day. My children come by on Sundays. Raymond has been coming by on Tuesdays too, which I suspect is less about seeing me and more about the sweet potato pie I have started making again. The way my grandmother made it. The real way, with brown sugar and fresh nutmeg and a little bit of bourbon in the filling. I am writing this down because someone asked me to. Someone at church, a young woman, maybe 30, newly married, with that particular expression on her face of a person just starting to feel something she doesn't have words for yet. She found me after service one Sunday and said, "Sister Loretta, can I ask you something?"
I said, "Of course, baby." She said, "Were you scared when you did what you did that night?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "No, not scared. I had been scared for a long time before that. Scared of what I'd find if I looked. Scared of what life looked like on the other side of the truth. But by the night of the banquet, all that scared was gone. By then, I was just clear." She said, "How did you get clear?" I said,
I stopped trying to make the story into something it wasn't. The story was what it was. I just had to decide what to do about it. She nodded slowly. She had her grandmother's eyes, this girl. That deep kind of seeing. She said, "Was it worth it?"
I looked at her. I thought about the morning light in my kitchen. I thought about the tomatoes on my balcony. I thought about sleeping in the middle of the bed with nobody on either side of me and waking up every single morning knowing exactly who I was. I said, every single minute of it. I patted her hand and I walked out into the sunshine and I did not look back. Loretta Mэй Johnson lives in Decatur, Georgia. She is currently planning a trip to Savannah. Her sweet potato pie remains, by general consensus, the best in DeKalb County.
From the author. Y'all, we just sat with Loretta for a while, and I hope it meant something to you. Before you go, I need to ask you something, and I mean this seriously. I want to know what you actually think. Did Loretta do the right thing, standing up at that banquet in front of 300 people at the microphone? Was that the move? Some of you are nodding right now. Some of you are shifting a little, and that's okay. Both of those reactions are worth talking about. Because here's what I keep thinking about. She had every legal right to walk away quietly. She had the papers filed, she had Darius, she had everything she needed to start over without saying a single public word. She chose to speak. She chose that room, that night, that microphone.
Was it dignity? Was it justice? Was it something she needed for herself? Not for the audience, not for Gerald, but for Loretta. Or do you think it went too far? That church was her community, her family, and she changed something in that room that can't be unchanged. I want you to think about what you would have done. Not what you think you should say, what you would have actually done. 41 years. Your mother's money. The woman in the green dress at a table near the back. Would you have been quiet and let the lawyers handle it? Would you have left sooner, years sooner, before it ever got to a banquet? Or would you have stood up, just like Loretta did, in a burgundy dress and your grandmother's pearls, and said your piece in front of everyone who ever knew your name?
Drop it in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And wherever you're listening from, Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, London, Lagos, wherever God placed you tonight, thank you. Thank you for giving this story your time, your ears, your heart. You didn't have to stay till the end. You did. And that matters more than you know. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And if nobody has told you today, you are not furniture. You never were. With love.